You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yes.
Did you hear that?
What are you on? What are you on right now?
Hello and welcome to A Century in Cinema. My name is Arthur.
My name is Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we watch and discuss a classic film from every year. This year, we're in 1955, taking a look at Rebel Without a Cause, from director Nicholas Ray and starring James Dean. For any new listeners, you can always find where our movies are streaming or available to rent online by checking our show notes. And also, for any new listeners, if you like the show, give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. If you're not a new listener and you haven't had the time to drop us a rating, hey, I get it, we're all busy. But 2 minutes, leave a quick review. We appreciate it.
Yep. Also, thank you, Nathan Royal, for our intro and outro music.
Yes.
I don't know if he's gotten a shout out for the past few episodes.
I don't know if he has.
Yeah,
yes, thank you, Nathan.
The people
Royal.
listening are like, was there a fallout? You know, why isn't Nathan getting a fallout anymore?
There has been no fallout with Nathan Royal, my friend Nathan. All right.
Halfway through the 50s.
It's flying by.
Yeah. It's crazy.
1955. The first McDonald's is built.
Oh, man. That is so funny that's your factoid. I never, ever eat McDonald's. Like, ever. And today, I don't know why, I was out doing a bunch of errands and I had taken a hike and stuff. And I just saw it at the drive-thru and I just got like a burger and a Sprite on my way home.
Well, let me hit you with this. Disneyland opens in California this year. Did you do anything Disneyland related?
I just got back from Disneyland too.
Oh my gosh.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I wish. God, I wish. I miss coasters, man.
I should also mention that the minimum wage in the United States is raised to $1 an hour this year.
Wow.
Rock and roll music continues to grow popular, and the Mickey Mouse Club debuts on ABC. In Alabama, African-American Rosa Parks is arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. That's this year. And if you remember, Brown versus the Board of Education was just last year.
Yes.
There are a lot of efforts to challenge segregation laws in the South going on around this time.
Now, I'm from Alabama.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
Obviously, I think integration was a great thing. But I do want to sort of drop a little factoid about the Rosa Parks situation. Do you know who Claudette Colvin is?
I have no idea.
Claudette Colvin was an African-American woman. She was in high school, and she was sitting near the front of a bus, and a white woman demanded that she get up and leave her seat, and she refused. She was just starting to be pregnant and did not want to have to move for this white woman. She stood her ground. She ended up getting kicked off the bus. The NAACP found out that she had done this and were so moved by it that they wanted to make sort of a movement out of it. Rosa Parks, who was a prominent member of the NAACP, became really good friends with Claudette Colvin, and they developed a friendship. And then it was sort of decided that Claudette Colvin, being underage and pregnant, wasn't a good face for the NAACP. So they staged a bus sit-in with Rosa Parks, an old woman who looked very fragile and was a quote-unquote safer bet for a good face. And they had all these publicists and everything show up. And it sort of ruined her and Claudette Colvin's friendship because she was so hurt that even other black people seemed to look down at her and see her as someone who was lesser than. But Colvin ended up being able to be one of the 5 plaintiffs in the first federal court case, Browder versus Gail, and that was challenging bus segregation in the city. And that was when that was when the ruling finally went down that segregation on public transport would go away. So behind the scenes, she was still able to do quite a bit for the movement, and her and Rosa Parks were able to eventually make up. And it's just one of those like weird little underground American stories that gets swept under the rug. And I think that Rosa Parks doing that and being the face of that movement was, an incredible thing, and she did a great job. But I always want to make sure Claudette Colvin gets a little shout out.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And it does reinforce something that I have occasionally mentioned during these sections of the podcast, that history is super complicated.
Yes.
And trying to bottle up an entire year into a 2-minute summary, you just lose all the interesting details. So I love that little story. Thank you.
Of course.
And speaking of reducing things, in geopolitics, I didn't know this, but America's military involvement in Vietnam starts this year. Vietnam used to be a French colony, but after World War II, a sort of civil war broke out with communist factions threatening to take over. So now America is involved.
That's so crazy. I automatically associate, America getting too deeply involved in Vietnam politics with the 70s. I don't think I realized that it happened this early.
Yeah, definitely late 60s, 70s, because it goes on until 75. It's a 20-year war.
Wow. I had no idea. And we didn't even officially declare war, as you stated earlier in this very podcast.
And we never will. All right, moving on. I see that a couple films come out this year, only a couple. I'll just do a very quick follow-up. Toho, the studio behind Godzilla, rushes out a sequel. 6 months later, Godzilla Raids Again is out.
Is that the one where he battles the Stegosaurus?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one was whatever.
Classic sequelitis.
Yeah, for sophomore slump, if you will. Charles Laughton, a very famous actor on the big screen, takes his first and only stab at directing this year and creates the American classic Night of the Hunter. It is critically savaged and underlooked and will not gain its modern reputation until almost 20 years later. But it is one of the greatest American films ever produced, in this podcaster's humble opinion. Of course, Diabolique comes out this year, a film that I absolutely love. The first film in Satyajit Ray's Apu trilogy, Pather Panchali, comes out this year. He is kind of the driving force of Indian cinema as far as international acclaim goes, and he also will not be receiving much acclaim at this point, but again, just a decade or so later, he will be lauded as one of the great international directors. What many people consider to be Carl Theodor Dreyer, the director of Vampire, what many people consider to be his masterpiece, or Debt, is released this year. It's a fantastic movie. And for those of you who remember the little tidbit about Jules Dassin being blacklisted and forced into France, this is the year that Rififi, the film that defines the heist thriller, is released. And oh my gosh, Bergman. Bergman has a huge year this year. One of my favorite stories ever. Smiles of a Summer Night is released this year. It is submitted to the Cannes Film Festival and is highly praised. Bergman had no idea that the Swedish film industry had submitted the film and was going to the restroom and was reading a paper while he was sitting down on the toilet and saw a Swedish film director wins high acclaim at Cannes Film Festival and thought, how on earth could there be this Swedish film director receiving all this praise and I've never even heard of them? And he's flipped to the page of the actual article and saw that it was him and it was his film, Smiles of Summer Night. It's so funny. Yeah, and that is the film that breaks through. We finally get a huge breakthrough with Bergman. He has joined Kurosawa as one of the central voices of international cinema from America's perspective. This is a great year for film, so I can't go into all of them, but yeah.
I mean, it's worth mentioning. We can just mention.
Yeah.
The 7-Year Itch with Marilyn Monroe. Lady and the Tramp from Disney.
To Catch a Thief, such a funny Hitchcock film. I love that movie.
And I think it's worth mentioning East of Eden, starring James Dean. And speaking of James Dean, Andrew, should we move on to Rebel Without a Cause?
Yes, let's continue.
So Jim Stark, played by James Dean, is a bad boy from a good family. I didn't make that up. That's the tagline.
Oh, yeah. Subjective.
He's angry with his parents. He drinks. He gets in fights. But after moving to LA and becoming the new kid at school, he wants to have a clean slate. Jim begins a friendship with a lonely kid, Plato, who's a very troubled classmate. Plato lost his father and begins to idolize Jim as a kind of replacement. Jim also forms a bond with a troubled girl, Judy, who has her own issues with her parents. But Judy is dating the school bully, Buzz, and being a jerk, Buzz antagonizes Jim, challenges him to a knife fight, and finally a drag race. Things go wrong from there, and quite a lot of issues unravel. During the race, Buzz dies in a car accident. Jim and Judy, now falling in love, run away from their parents and take refuge in an abandoned mansion. Plato steals a gun from his mother and joins them. The three are ambushed by Buzz's gang, who want revenge, and Plato sort of snaps. He shoots one of the bullies, runs away. There's a confrontation at the Griffith Observatory, and even as Jim tries to calm his friend down and save him, the police see that Plato has a gun and shoot him down. And that's Rebel Without a Cause.
Yep, precisely. What did you think of the movie?
I really loved it.
Awesome.
Did you really love it?
I liked it. This has kind of been on my list of shame as well. And on top of being on my list of shame, I also am just a humongous fan of Nicholas Ray. I love this director. And one of the reasons I've weirdly avoided this film, and it's mostly been subconscious, it hasn't been like I've been saying this, but it's just considered to be his ultimate achievement, and it's considered to be his masterpiece. I don't know. I never wanted to break through that too much because I consider so many other films he's made actual masterpieces. And yeah, I couldn't help it. My bias came in just a little bit, and I was thinking I really, really like this, but not as much as his other films, which was the opinion I kind of always knew I was going to have, because Bigger Than Life, In a Lonely Place, and Johnny Guitar, which we'll talk more about later, that all three of those I consider to be just like masterpieces of their genre. And this film feels like a really important stepping stone, especially towards Bigger Than Life, as far as the topics being discussed. But I won't lie, it did not completely wow me. I want to revisit it. I already want to revisit it. That dumb stuff being out of the way, I was very entertained by the film. I thought it was beautifully written. I thought all of the performances were really well done. I thought the drag race sequence was just jaw-dropping. I was on the edge of my seat, clenching my knees. I really enjoyed the level of tension present in that sequence. And I thought the music was beautiful, and I thought the film was beautifully shot. Yeah, there's a lot to love about it. I can already feel that I'm liking it more the more I'm talking about it. It's a little fresh. I just watched it 2 nights ago.
Okay. I think you'll grow on this one.
Yeah.
No, I loved it. I really liked how nihilistic it felt. I liked the darkness that was slowly encroaching throughout the film. I thought there was a great build-up to the end. And yeah, it was thrilling. It was tense.
Oh, and I loved, of course, how much I love gay subtext in a film. Although it pretty much becomes full-on text by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Plato clearly is in love with Jim, and I found that very compelling. Even more so considering there were all of these accusations of Nicholas Ray being bisexual, and Nicholas Ray was always very, very sensitive around that subject. He infamously once said that he didn't consider himself to be gay or bisexual, but he believes that everybody has fantasized about people of the same gender at some point in their life, which may or may not be true, but he is a white working man in Hollywood in the 50s, so he's really not allowed to be bisexual or gay. Regardless of if he actually was or not, I feel a pulse of that repression in this film, which I really enjoyed.
And the text of the film is that Plato sees Jim as a surrogate father figure. And he snaps when he feels like Jim has abandoned him in the same way that his father did.
Right.
But no.
Yeah. We've come a long way, but people still associate homosexuality with daddy issues. Like, that's still a very common thing that people say. Like, he doesn't get the attention he needs from his dad and therefore becomes gay, which is, like, very much a mentality at this point in history in the 50s. Obviously, there is no actual correlation there, besides the fact that, you know, sometimes dads are a little less accepting of that than moms are. And even that's more just a case-by-case basis. But
I mean, this is a high school drama, but it doesn't feel like it at all.
mainly because everyone looks like they're in their 30s.
It's true. But I mean that the film swerves into a genre that doesn't feel at all like the sort of high school drama cliques, hierarchies, that
Yes.
nothing like that by the end. I mean, they are in literally the same mansion from Sunset Boulevard. It's the same set. It's cool.
Yes.
And it's so creepy and really horrifying the way everything's framed and how everything looks. Even though I expected this film to be more like Grease, maybe? Like, not that silly, you know? But more like a high school drama, and it's just not at all. And that was kind of exciting.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts, yeah.
Grease is an interesting comparison because, I mean, obviously Grease didn't come out till 1978, 79. And it's more of a yearning for nostalgia of this time period. But then this film that's actually about its time period that comes out within the time period itself is like, everything sucks right now. Well, Grease is like glorifying it. So that's
it's
an
so
interesting
interesting that the teenagers in 1955 would gravitate to this kind of film. Because the 50s are seen as this very happy-go-lucky time in American history. Doesn't feel that way when you watch this.
No, not Nicholas Ray definitely did not enjoy the overly saturated nuclear family model 1950s wholesome act. We can jump into Nicholas Ray now. Like I've said, he made a film called Bigger Than Life. That is a film about a school teacher in the 50s who starts taking a pill called cortisone to make himself feel better and to give himself more energy throughout the day. And it ends up driving him completely insane, and he attempts to murder his wife and his young son. It is a very intense film. It's a beautiful movie, and the whole thing starts off all smiles and giggles and 1950s, wholesomeness. And the whole movie is just about how underneath all of that is this inability to properly express emotions because you can't feel anything except for happiness, contentness, and comfort, because that is what's expected from you in 1950s America. This film seems to be saying a very similar thing. He just doesn't seem to be a big fan of this weird mind control post-war America where everyone is convinced that they are so safe that they have no choice but to be happy all the time. And his films always seem to be sort of banging against a wall, screaming for genuine emotion to be able to be felt and for people to be able to express themselves without feeling shame or humiliation, which he thought was not possible around this time period. In a Lonely Place has a very similar message to it. Humphrey Bogart, completely dissatisfied with his life and unable to express it in any way, also has some very on the nose sexual undertones to it as far as the inability to express his true sexuality. So yeah, I think that that's a huge theme of this work, and Rebel Without a Cause definitely feels like it's fitting more into that canon. Johnny Guitar, his Western, is very much about trying to break through gender roles and gender stereotypes of the 50s by doing a period piece and showing what the world could be like with women in power earlier during the Wild West. But this is way more current and talking about how men being unable to express their true pain are forced into these sort of pockets and have no choice but to sort of lash out. They just hit a boiling point, which I think is really interesting. Yeah, Nicholas Ray would work as a successful director for a pretty long time, but he had a lot of issues with drug and alcohol abuse. And I don't know if did you notice the small cameo from Dennis Hopper in this film?
No. When was that?
Oh, he's one of the blonde bullies in Buzz's gang.
Oh, okay.
He's the one that hangs the chicken and makes the clucking noise and stuff. Dennis Hopper would actually go on to sort of help Nicholas Ray once he was more established in Hollywood and got him a gig as a professor for a university. And then Nicholas Ray ended up getting fired from that job once it was discovered through this film project that he was smoking marijuana with his students. Like, 70s are known for, their drug culture by today's standards, but you have to remember that at the time, there was an equal force of just pushing completely against that, and complete fear of it.
Right.
Which still exists. I just don't think it's as strong now.
Can I ask you?
Yes.
If this picture I see of Nicholas Ray with an eye patch is real?
I don't know if I've seen him with an eye patch. Why? Where is
an eye patch in Letterboxd? I can't see anything immediately on it, but there's just a quick reference that he lost most of the vision in one eye later in his career, and he covered it with an eye patch. So yeah, I guess that's a thing.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, once he wasn't able to direct anymore, he worked on some films with Wim Wenders, and he still was able to get work here and there, but he was never able to really fully recapture his glory days. But yeah, and then he would die of lung cancer in 1979, right after collaborating with Wim Wenders on Lightning Over Water.
Now, speaking of people in their glory days, James Dean.
Yeah.
Only had glory days.
Yeah, the face of Live Fast, Die Young.
Dark.
Yeah. It's really strange. I don't want to get into Natalie Wood too much on this episode because we are going to be doing West Side Story later, and I'll talk about her more then. But I do want to talk about James Dean and Sal Mineo. All three of the main actors of Rebel Without a Cause died young under kind of crazy circumstances.
Now, Sal, he plays Plato.
Yes.
Okay. Wait, how did he die?
So he was just driving home one night, and while he was getting out of his car, a man came up and just stabbed him.
Oh my, what?
Yeah, and I think he was like in his mid-30s, 37.
Wow.
Yeah, it was originally thought to be a hate crime. He, again, just because of the time period, never fully came out as homosexual, but many people believed that he was. And that was a rumor that sort of was a part of his life until he died. And so it was actually rumored at first that it was a hate crime, that someone had killed him because he was gay. And then as more details rolled out, it turned out it was just a random robber, and he'd robbed 10 other houses that same night and had no idea who Sal Mineo was, but he thought that he had seen him robbing another house. So he just quickly ran up and stabbed him while he was getting out of his car.
Oh, that is sad. When you said it was possibly a hate crime, I was wondering if it was because he is Sicilian.
And that might have been something that was tossed around back then too. He was typecast as this role in Rebel Without a Cause pretty much throughout his career after the film. He was always the misunderstood loner kid with a dark past. And that would eventually sort of evolve into him always playing a sort of stereotypical villain. So he decided he didn't want to be a part of Hollywood anymore and started doing stage acting. And then, yeah, right, like pretty quickly after that was when he was murdered. Yeah, so, I mean, James Dean gives the performance of a lifetime in this film, which is his last movie.
That's actually not true.
Oh.
Giant is his last film.
I love that movie. Oh my God. And yeah, James Dean has this incredible scene where he's extremely drunk and he's giving a speech on a microphone to a completely empty room. And it's just like one of the best acted scenes I think I've ever seen in a movie.
So that was his last movie. A couple of his lines had to be dubbed over because he had passed away. He wasn't available to redo the lines. But it still feels like this film is often promoted or seen in popular culture as his last film, which I do find interesting. Is that on purpose? The producers really thought they could get a lot out of that? I don't know.
Having seen like all of the major James Dean films now, this was the only one left. I totally thought The Giant came out before this one. I don't know why. So, yeah, I was like a victim of that as well. I always assumed that this was his last film. I think it's because this film came out. This was the first film of his to come out right after his death.
Yeah, it was like a month later.
Yeah. So I think maybe that's why I had it in my head that this was his last movie. Man, to have like a performance in something like Giant, which is honestly one of the best screen performances I've ever seen, have that come out. I guess it was a year after his death now that I'm looking into it. I mean, that's he left a legacy.
He was nominated for Best Actor twice. This is the first film where he had top billing. And yeah, we talked a little about the naturalism that's being popularized by actors like Marlon Brando. And James Dean is doing a great job with it.
Yeah.
He's accused of copying Marlon Brando's style, actually. Just simulating the way he talks. At least in the critics' reviews that I read. Do you feel that way or no?
Do I feel like he's ripping off Brando?
Yeah.
No. And we're also coming from a place of privilege of being able, now everyone's doing naturalism and acting. That's just like what acting is now. But I don't see him as like doing a Brando ripoff. I see him as performing very strongly as an actor. And while I would definitely agree that there are certain nuances that are similar between them, I think it's just because as far as the emotionally unavailable male protagonist of a 50s film, there are, limited permutations to the actions and the lash outs that can happen.
Yeah, I loved how he kind of stuttered and was kind of awkward in his performance, stilted lines a little bit, because that's the way an awkward teenager would talk. I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there anything else you want to mention about James Dean?
We didn't even talk about his death.
Oh, of course. We mentioned it. But James Dean passes away after filming this movie.
And I did not know the circumstances of the plot of this film, with the drag racing and Buzz dying.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But I mean, it's, it's not the same thing because it was more of an accident, but he was going way too fast and he was into drag racing. And then, he hit the passenger side of a car that was coming at him the opposite way and flipped over the highway. His passenger was thrown from the car, but he was stuck inside and he broke his neck and a bunch of other bones and passed away.
Passed away before he even got to the hospital. Now, there's a dark, dark irony watching this film and knowing that. And then he rolls out of his car right before it goes over the cliff.
And Buzz's cloth is caught on the door and he can't get out. And I don't think that's what happened. We don't know all of those details, but just seeing him being, for some reason or whatever, unable to escape the car while it's in free fall was it made my skin crawl. I loved that sequence, but I had no idea that happened in this movie.
That had to have felt icky watching that in the theater 1 month after the star dies.
A month later. Crazy.
So James Dean passes away. He was an up and coming star in the Hollywood system. Everyone knew it.
Mm-hmm.
Warner Brothers definitely knew it when they realized that they had James Dean on their hands. They upgraded this film and started shooting it in color. A few scenes were shot in black and white, and then those scenes had to be refilmed in color once a decision was made that the film was now going to be a James Dean film.
And CinemaScope. I don't think you could even do black and white in CinemaScope. I don't think that's how the film stock worked.
Oh, I don't know those details.
Yeah, CinemaScope, kind of the IMAX of its time. It's able to present films in 2.55 to 1, which pretty much just means it looks very, very wide. Imagine a 70 millimeter film, if you're familiar with anything like that. And it does create a very subtle sort of fisheye lens effect. Did you notice that throughout the movie?
Oh, absolutely. Anytime someone's face is on the edge of the frame, you can tell that they're being squished.
Yeah. The one shot that I thought just was so good was Natalie Wood giving the signal to the racers, and then we see her standing there and the cars come in from both sides and they sort of like are distorted and then come into view and then are racing next to each other. I thought that looked so good. And it's funny to watch a movie like this and know that they were throwing all of this new technology on it and wanting it to be this big, successful visual feast.
Yeah, this is the Avatar of 1955, Andrew.
Exactly. And it's like the plot and the script are so much more dense than any film that I can think of in recent memory that gets that same sort of treatment.
Definitely, they take advantage of it. But as I was watching it, I did have a passing thought of, oh, this is the first film in color where I actually don't have much to say about the color. We watch Black Narcissus and The Red Shoes, and especially Robin Hood, and all those films seemed like they were taking more advantage of the Technicolor technology, and this just felt a little flat. Now, there is one exception to that.
Okay.
The Red Jacket. I mean, the Red Jacket is classic.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of the scenes with the Red Jacket where he's giving it to Plato and whatnot would have actually played nearly as well in black and white.
I do think that there is something to be said for this film looking more natural with its colors when it's telling such a small scale story about this movie is more or less about depression and anxiety, right?
Loneliness, yeah, you're right.
And of course, when we're talking about Black Narcissus and Red Shoes, those are both extremely expressionistic stories with high stakes melodrama involved and huge set pieces. So I think it's a little more fitting that they have these really vibrant popping colors. But yeah, I definitely would agree with you that this film, the color does not seem to be as big of a deal, which is probably a really important step in cinema to get out of the mindset that color means something has to be like special or understood. I think at this point, for film to survive, artists are becoming aware that it needs to be in color, and we're hitting that transition here pretty hard.
Can I ask you, did you notice that this is our first film also not in Technicolor that was shot in color?
I guess that probably ties into it. I didn't know that, but that makes sense. Do you know like how they achieved this color or what they did for their color stock?
Now, I did a ton of research about the 3-strip color process that Technicolor was using in Robin Hood and during those earlier years, color cinema. I don't know nearly as much about Eastman color, which is this new process that only uses 1 strip. And the 3-strip process had these huge cameras. It was incredibly expensive, hard to develop. You had to go through this huge elaborate process. Only the giant budget films could do it. But once Eastman color comes along, and there are some other processes that are cheaper that start to hit the market, this is when regular films can actually work color into their budgets.
Fascinating.
I also mentioned Technicolor preserves incredibly well. The 3-strip process looks about the same today as it did 70 years ago when we're watching something like Robin Hood, but I think that Eastman color does not hold up as well, so there's a little bit more you have to do to preserve it. It doesn't look quite right. It kind of degrades, but it's worth it. If you can just shoot it all on 1 film strip, not have to go through the giant process. It's called Warner color at the beginning in the credits. I don't know if that's a special thing only happening with Warner Brothers. I don't know.
I fully believe that it's just color film developed by some unknown scientist or studio, and then Warner Brothers was like, that's ours now. That sounds right.
Yeah, I'm clicking around. There was Metro Color over at MGM. They're all just making this up.
Yeah, it's so weird. I feel like Disney didn't really do anything like that. They were just like, our movies have been in color for forever. Catch up. We're just Disney.
Yeah, because I see here 2001 A Space Odyssey was filmed with Eastman Color, but it's credited as Metro Color. Oh, yeah. All right, so that's our update on color film. Do you know if all of this was a response to the television industry? You know, the wider screens, more color in the cinemas, because everyone had a black and white TV in their home by now.
Oh, yeah.
I just assume, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, people were getting scared that people weren't going to go to the movies anymore because of their TV, so they had to up the ante of what you could see in a theater. And it's like, oh, you can see color in a theater, you know?
You can see this weird fisheye effect in a theater.
Yes. I think that there were special theaters in LA that could do like this huge, like semi wraparound screen. And that actually took away from the fisheye and just made it look like this huge, wide thing. I know that was a thing with CinemaScope. I don't know. I would assume they did that with this film. But I know that was something they could do with CinemaScope projection. So,
cool.
Yeah, but that was fun. Have you ever seen Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows?
No.
It is such a good movie. It actually came out this same year. And there is this hilarious sequence in it just to give you a perspective on how Hollywood filmmakers felt about television. It's all about this woman whose husband dies. And there is this really, really dark comedic scene where her family, while in mourning, are like pretty much saying they're going to try and help her replace her husband and then unveil a television set that they bought for her. But yeah, I mean, that's like kind of the perspective of Hollywood on television, is that it's just this weird empty void that people are losing themselves to. People still feel that way. Cell phones. Yeah, that feeling never goes away. People felt that way about books at a certain point in history. So
that's right. People just losing themselves in books.
Yeah. Sorry, the review, was that what you wanted to talk about? It's a good review.
Yeah, we should talk about the review. We are diverting from our good friend Bosley Crowther over at New York Times to look at a review from The Hollywood Reporter. I don't think they like it, but they do say that it's going to make a ton of money, and they're right.
You don't think they liked it?
I don't think they do.
I will say this was my perspective on the review. I definitely can see where you're coming from with thinking they didn't like it. I felt like they were really struggling with seeing themselves up on screen. They mentioned that they feel like they relate to this situation a little bit too much.
Yeah.
And therefore have certain opinions on the perspectives. But it's also got all these contradictions in it, right? Because they're like, you can't blame the parents for everything. And then in the review himself, he's like, and then instead of blaming the parents, they try and blame the other kids at certain points. And it's like, yeah, it's a nuanced, more complicated thing than just blaming one symptom for anything. It's showing that, you know, American culture at this point has some poison in the water. And I feel like this reviewer is coming to terms with that literally while they're writing this review. Because they start off on this whole tangent about how the film is blaming everything on the parents, which it definitely isn't. And then, yeah, eventually sort of contradicts themselves by saying, well, the film also does this. Yeah, you feel like there's like an inner battle going on in this review, which to me did read as if they had taken more from it than they might have expected. Yeah, I actually was very entertained by reading this review because, yeah, when the second paragraph first started up and they start deviating from a plot synopsis into these kind of wily opinions, I was thinking, oh, whoa, I don't think they liked it. And then by the end, I was like, oh, man, I've been there. I've seen that movie that cuts a little bit too deep and I didn't want it to. I've been there. And so I just sort of related to him. I was like, yeah, man, I get it. Like sometimes you see a movie and you are like feel a mixture of almost embarrassment. And then you just want to reject it. But then you also have to come to terms with the fact that it really did hit something that is very personal to you and hit it in a way that you were able to relate to. And you do have to acknowledge that. So, yeah. Yeah, I loved this movie. See, there it goes. That's all it took. I really did. I mean, like, and especially while we've been talking about it, I mean, I don't have anything negative to say about it, except for there is a more nuanced take on the 50s from this director a few years later. And that's not a criticism of this film. Again, I think he had to make this one to get to that point.
Okay, and I thought this was a pretty nuanced take, at least for 1955.
That's fair.
Because coming back to that idea of the nihilism felt by kids in school or the younger generation during this time, I mean, the scene where they're all sitting in the observatory watching the presentation of the cosmos and the presenter...
he gets way too into it, man. I thought that was hilarious.
Keeps going and going about how the universe is going to end and everything is moving towards heat death, and all the kids are just watching, just taking it all in. I'm thinking, yeah, kids in the 1950s having to watch these bizarre propaganda pieces about what to do in a nuclear attack.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really had a film that deals with the end of the world in our list.
Yeah.
It's so common nowadays, right? Every film has the end of the world. It's a cliche, it's a trope, it's just a storytelling device at this point.
Yeah, don't worry, the Thundercats will save us.
But in this film, Plato asks Jim at the end, do you think the world will end at nighttime? And Jim responds, no, it'll be at dawn. And I don't know why, but that felt so poignant and seemed to really hit at something that I think kids in school in 1955 probably felt. Also, remember, Andrew, these are kids who didn't go and fight in the war, World War II or World War I. They're coming from this bizarre sort of generation in between those wars that almost feels meaningless. They grew up in the Great Depression and they probably didn't grow up with much. I can see why they're called the silent generation, and I think that this film does a great job of portraying their angst.
Yes. I mean, even that scene you just mentioned is such a good example of this whole film, because it's all these teenagers witness what is essentially the end of the world and are unable to compute it. We cut to their faces and they all are sort of giving blank stares, like they have no idea how to take in any of this information. And then the next thing that happens is this really petty bullying, like, well, we can't control the world, so we might as well try and control this new kid who just joined the school.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
It was great. It was great, everybody. I lied at the beginning. I just needed to talk to Arthur about it for an hour or so. I loved it.
And I also loved it, as I said at the beginning. Now, you mentioned here that you want to compare how this film depicts everyday American life versus something like Tokyo Story, everyday Japanese life.
Because all of Tokyo Story is about this inability to find comfort, you know? Like, they go to their children and they're thinking, oh, we're going to be able to relax and have a nice vacation with our children, and then they are unable to. And so the children send them off to this bathhouse and they're like, oh, you'll be able to relax there. And they go to the bathhouse and are unable to relax. And it just feels like Japan is coming from this place of just constant on the edge nervousness and sort of powerlessness. And this film is showing all of the anxiety that comes up from having too much comfort, from feeling like that you can just lay back and everything's going to be okay. I just really liked the fact that these two movies show the different sort of anxieties bubbling up in a post-war world so soon after the war was over. And one is from a country that feels like they've lost everything and has been bombed, and one is from a country that never had war touch its soil. Well, I guess Pearl Harbor.
It didn't. It just didn't.
Yeah, it's
by
like
any measurable comparison.
I'm acknowledging Pearl Harbor as a tragedy, but yeah, as far as a point of comparison to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it didn't at all. Yeah.
So I have a question for you. I think I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Ooh.
Do you think that this film still supports a traditional family structure, a nuclear American family? Because all the kids we see, especially Plato, are the products of homes that are failing them because the father isn't fulfilling his role or the mother isn't fulfilling her role as we'd come to expect in a traditional family. Question mark.
I don't think that it's supporting the nuclear family by showing examples of troubled kids coming from a lack of that. I think it's showing that the nuclear family as a model is impossible to achieve. Because on paper, there really should be nothing wrong with Jim's family or his parents or anything. They did, quote unquote, everything right, and now they should be able to live this happy, peaceful, comfortable existence. But they don't. And they can't because they're human beings.
I was going to say Jim's family, it feels like his father is sort of falling short of the manly man, breadwinner, protecting the honor of the family role that you might expect from a nuclear family. And that's really what Jim is very angry about. He's angry about a lot of things. As you pointed out in that review, there's many factors. He is a rebel without a cause. He has nothing to rebel against in particular. I'm very sorry for that. I want to backtrack. That was terrible.
No, keep it in, Arthur. I loved it so much. I loved it so much. We never do that. We get to do it for this one. Oh, did you have anything to say as far as like comparing America's depiction in Rebel Without a Cause and Japan and Tokyo Story?
I just wanted to ask that question about if this film supports the traditional nuclear family. But I think your point that it is saying that is just an impossible standard is the right way to see it.
And again, I mean, I have too much information. Literally, that is the text of Bigger Than Life, which shows a happy-go-lucky, nothing could possibly go wrong 50s nuclear family. And then everything goes completely wrong. You have to watch it, Arthur. You're going to love that movie. Arthur and I got to watch a movie together for the first time in over a year because we were both vaccinated. We watched... we watched Wong Kar-wai's As Tears Go By. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, we both had a really great time with it.
It took my breath away.
Yeah, I loved it. Music was so cool. There's a Chinese cover of Take My Breath Away that's played in earnest at first and then eventually is used as a punchline. And I just thought that was great. I loved everything about that.
Wong Kar-wai, master of cinema. I have loved every film I've seen from him, no matter what color grade.
We're not getting into that on this podcast.
No, that's for our other podcast.
That's for the Wong Kar-wai retrospective podcast, where we watch my Blu-ray and then the Criterion Blu-ray and do 2 episodes on each movie.
It's a great podcast where we take 2 images and you can't see them and talk about them side by side.
Anyways, my point being... Arthur and I got to get together and watch a movie, and while he was over, I told him that my next big sell to him as a director would be Nicholas Ray, because I love his films. Johnny Guitar I consider to be one of the greatest westerns ever made. Might be my all-time favorite western ever made. And In a Lonely Place is such a devastating film. I mean, the ending of that movie will just rip your little heart out. And Bigger Than Life. I don't think that there's ever been a more astute criticism of the quote-unquote American dream and pursuit of happiness. And it freaked me out the first time I watched it. It's still freaky. Now it's more of like a melodrama for me. But the first time I watched it, I won't lie, I was in abject horror during parts of it. yeah, I won't spoil any of the scenes from that film, but there are just some really dark moments in there. And it's all a criticism on the way we perceive men, the way we perceive women, what we expect from gender roles, and how it's impossible for people to fit inside of those gender roles. Really great performances from everyone in the cast. Yeah, bigger than life. My big sell for this episode.
And I love this movie, so I am down for more Nicholas Ray.
Yeah. And that one just came out the next year. That one came out in 1956.
Cool.
So it's, yeah, crazy.
I think that's good. I think that's Rebel Without a Cause. Let's tell our dear listeners what the next film is on the lineup.
Next week's film is John Ford's The Searchers, because no cinema retrospective podcast would be complete without an episode on John Ford.
John Wayne, right?
Yeah. This is another on the list of shame. You're catching all my weak spots, which is good. I, don't want that list to exist, honestly. But yeah, I mean, I've seen so many shots from this film. I mean, infamously, the silhouette in the door over the sunrise shot is like one of the...
Oh, that's this movie?
Yeah. It's like one of the great shots in cinema that everyone's seen. So, of course, I've seen that. But, yeah, I don't really know what it's about or what to expect. I'm very, very excited. I love every John Ford movie I've seen. So I'm ready to see the one that people consider his masterpiece.
Is it? Do people consider this his masterpiece?
A lot of people. It's like this or Stagecoach, and I love Stagecoach.
Well, cool. Go to the show notes, see where that's streaming or available to rent, and we will talk about that next week. That sounds good?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Good episode.
Yeah, man. Good times.
I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.